Hello, everybody. I want to thank Michael Hull for inviting me to share something. I know he probably would have preferred that I write something, but it's very hard for me to write. I have time now. I'm driving, keep my eyes on the road, and I can talk. And the Bible says the voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. So, as the son of Jacob, I talk a lot. Although maybe I'll be able to sit down and write something also. And he just very kindly asked me, it's a big honor, that if I would contribute something to the conversation on the Facebook group about Clarkstown, what they don't want you to know. I don't remember if that's the exact name. About this video, and I made another video on this subject, but this is another video maybe discussing a little bit more and reiterating some of the things I said in the previous video, and you can see that, but specifically addressing this request and in my own way. Like Frank Sinatra, he said, "What's much more than this, I did it my way." Also, I do things my way. I'm a little bit out of the box, but I think much of what I'm saying is rooted in Jewish tradition. But I'm reminded of the story of Rabbi Halberstam, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, that they would say that he would upset the religious Jews by saying you have to embrace the secular Jews and love them, and he would upset the secular Jews by telling them they have to be religious. And so he just wound up upsetting everybody. I have a little bit of different approach than he had also, but I think I'm going to wind up upsetting everybody, because I am upset about the video from the Rockland GOP, but I do not believe it to be anti-Semitic. However, I do find it to be problematic. Maybe not for the reasons a lot of other people do. I don't have a knee-jerk reaction to say everything's anti-Semitic. And I personally, this is what would upset probably most other Jews when I say something like this, is I reject the concept of anti-Semitism and of Semitism. Meaning, to me, Judaism is a religion and not a race. And as far as the Jewish law concerns, and I don't mean this in any way to be disrespectful to people who are not of my faith, but I'm being honest about what my faith teaches, that there are different categories of human beings. There are Jews, there are non-Jews, and then there's another category of people who are technically Jewish, but they lose somewhat the privileges of the Jewish community, to whatever extent. So, to not be Jewish, you're not born Jewish, and you didn't choose to convert, there's nothing wrong with that. You're free to convert to Judaism if you want, if you believe in this religion and you want to observe its precepts, and you think you might be able to do it, or some other reason, but you can remain as a Jew. You're welcome to, but we don't force you. And the Talmud is very clear that the pious, good religious people of all different nations, of all different religions, have a place in the world to come. And we do not impose our religion on anyone who is not born into the Jewish faith. However, Judaism is a religion and not a race, and anybody of any religion can convert to Judaism. But for the same matter, if someone was born Jewish, perhaps, or they claim such a thing, and they've made themselves an enemy of Judaism, enemy of the Jewish people, perhaps, an enemy of God. So King David says, "Those who hate you, Lord, I hate with the utmost hatred." That's in the Bible, in the book of Psalms. And there are certain individuals. That's not to say every Jew who's not Orthodox, who's not observant, is in that category. But there are certain people, maybe there's only one or two in the world, maybe such a category exists in a theoretical sense and doesn't actually exist at all. Maybe there are no people like this. But there are people who, while they do not become non-Jews, they do not become Gentiles, they lose their status as Jews to a certain extent. And there's different interpretations of what that is, but that's across the board orthodoxy accepts that there are certain people who might be born Jewish, but if one of the laws of kosher is that wine and grape juice, until if it hasn't been pasteurized, if someone who's not an observant Jew touches it, the wine is no longer kosher. Wine and grape juice. If not, they don't not just touch it, but they pick it up, and it's open. It's an open container, and they pick it up because there's worry that it might have been used for an idolatrous ceremony, and so that's a biblical prohibition to partake of wine that was used in an idolatrous ceremony, and out of fear that maybe it was used or could have been used for an idolatrous ceremony, the ancient rabbis made such a decree. But this is not a racial issue, because like we said, if someone converts and they're Jewish, it's kosher, even if it doesn't matter what race they were from. And the same thing, someone who's born Jewish, or maybe they converted and they left, the wine is not kosher. And so I'm saying this to make a point, and there's other questions, maybe counting for a quorum, for prayer. There are different opinions about that as well. And also there are different opinions of how irreligious does someone have to be in this status, that if they touch the wine, it's not kosher. And there's different interpretations of what that means. Does it mean they drive to synagogue on the Sabbath? Some would say yes, and others would say they're praying. They're somewhat, they recognize the Sabbath. They say the Sabbath liturgy. Perhaps that's enough. And there are different interpretations. It's neither here nor there. But the point that I'm bringing out here is that Judaism is a religion and not a race. And this idea of calling someone of this concept of anti-Semitism means that there's some kind of a racial quality to the hatred of Jews, which obviously does exist or did exist in history. Certainly that was the ideology of the Nazi Party, was hating Jews as a race, but that was, I believe, a result of so many Jews abandoning their faith, and it's like a wake-up call from God. And this is in the Bible, in the Torah, in the end of Leviticus, end of Deuteronomy, that these things will happen as a result of Jews breaking the covenant, of the children of Israel breaking the covenant, and horrible, horrible things. It's all there in the Bible. But the thing is there is still a concept of pious Jews being persecuted and so forth, which is similar to what you find in the Christian tradition, where in the Christian Bible, what Christians call the New Testament, they have this concept that if you're a Christian, you're going to be persecuted. And we have a similar idea in Judaism, but it's generally, when there's people crying anti-Semitism, they tend to be the less religious people. However, there is a difference between anti-Semitism, which is a racially motivated approach, and what I prefer to call Judeophobia, which is religiously based, similar to how Muslims they're not saying it's an anti-Arab hatred, but a hatred of Muslims or of Islam. And Judeophobia does indeed exist, and that's what, to me, I'm personally more concerned with as a Jew who tries to be religious the best I can, is that I'm more concerned with Judeophobia than I am with anti-Semitism. And a lot of Judeophobia comes from people who are Jews who have left their faith. You know, we saw the story in the Hamptons where there was a desire to build an A-roof, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this, and I made videos explaining. And it was the secular Jews who did not want Orthodox Jews, didn't want more Orthodox Jews moving into their community, who were opposing the construction of an A-roof. That is religious bigotry. And freedom of religion is protected by the First Amendment. And to me, something like that is much more troubling than someone having conspiracy theories about the Rothschild bankers who are not religious. There are religious people named Rothschild, good pious Jews, but and even some of them might be wealthy, but they're not. Not that I believe these conspiracy theories. But some of them are true. But some years earlier this year, I gained some attention because I sent an email to Ben Garrison, who's a cartoonist, and he made a cartoon criticizing the Rothschilds and George Soros. And to me, George Soros is like a super villain from a James Bond movie. He's the most evil person I could imagine. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm accepting conspiracy theories, but I'm very influenced by Glenn Beck. I think he's a fair, decent, level-headed person who thinks a lot before he says something. And this is what we have with from him. And I reached out to Ben Garrison and I said I do not find this cartoon to be offensive. And I defended him and I stood up for him, and a lot of people were mad at me. A lot of Jewish people were mad at me. But I felt that it was proper to defend him. And I find George Soros to be a very dangerous and frightening, scary person. And I don't think it's anti-Semitic to be upset about someone who's an atheist. I think he for sure would be in the category of someone who, has lost their Jew card, and yet he still claims the Jew card because the left has turned Judaism from a race from a religion to a race, which it's not. And the whole idea of this, it comes from Germany in the 1850s or so, this idea of racializing Jewish identity. So with that being said, I don't believe bigotry that's targeted against Orthodox Jews is anti-Semitism, but I believe it can be if it's bigotry. And I'm not saying this video is necessarily bigotry, but it can be, like I said, Judeophobia, like we discussed how the Muslims speak of Islamophobia. And I think, certainly when there's an effort to prevent someone from building a mikveh or building an A-roof, that is religious bigotry. When there's questions about other issues of zoning other than building religious, a religiously based edifice or other land use, doesn't even have to be an edifice. The A-roof is also land use. these things are protected by federal statute. The Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act is a federal law, and these things are protected. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people can skirt the law. They have to follow the proper procedure, but it should be just basically a rubber stamp. You want to do this, yes, does it meet the building codes or whatever it is, and that's it. And I think a lot of times people do use nonsense excuses to cover up bigotry when it comes to these issues of building an Eruv, building a mikveh, building a synagogue, or even using a private residence as a synagogue and so forth. These things are protected by federal statute. And the law goes both ways. Using a private residence for a religious gathering, I don't believe, unless there's issues of parking and other things like that, have any bearing on these types of things. Especially if someone's not claiming tax-exempt status, which the vast majority of these homes that are used for religious purposes do not claim it. It's not worth it for them. Generally, they're not. The effort and the expense that goes into getting this is more than they would save, and they're not. So they don't usually get a tax exemption. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and so forth. And this is something that is going on in Rockland County, where there is religious bigotry against people meeting in their homes and praying, and like I said, for the most part, these are not even incorporated synagogues. It's just that they're getting together and praying. Maybe they have a Torah scroll, maybe they don't. Maybe they only meet Friday night out of convenience so people don't have to walk to the synagogue. It's a common thing all throughout the Orthodox Jewish world to have something like this, to have a Friday night minyan in an apartment or in a house, because people don't feel like walking, especially when you have maybe older people who can't walk and they start a minyan in their basement or something. This has been going on for a long time, and the government should have no business in preventing something like that from happening. But like I said, when it comes to building synagogues and building Eruv and mikvahs, things like that, it should just be a basic, simple rubber stamp process, because the federal statute protects this. But like I said in the previous video, I'm reminded of that episode of Seinfeld where Jerry Seinfeld goes to the confessional booth in the Catholic Church, and he sits down there with the priest instead of kneeling because he didn't know what he's doing, and he tells the priest about the dentist who converted to Judaism for the jokes, and he's trying to get total joke immunity, and the priest asks him, "And that offends you as a Jewish person?" He said, "No, it offends me as a comedian." So, a lot of the issues brought up in this video don't offend me so much as a Jewish person as they offend me as a Republican. The Republican Party today tends to be more libertarian, certainly more libertarian than the Democrat Party, and that should be it, meaning self-government, federalism, things like this. Very, deregulation or very minimal regulations, and freedom and liberty and religious liberty. And I mentioned a few other things. The Hasidic community tends to be very strongly supportive of President Trump. For years, and I was not very happy with candidate Trump. I really wanted, very strongly, I wanted Ted Cruz. I voted for Ted Cruz in the primary. but I just felt that Hillary Clinton was such a dangerous candidate that even though I knew he wasn't going to win New York, I voted for President Trump. And I thought maybe, who knows, he might have won New York. I mean, it's just the city cancels out the rest of the state. Now, but when I bring this up, though, that the Hasidic community and the Orthodox communities tend to be, and the Hasidic communities are mostly either non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. So it's not just because President Trump is supportive of Israel, because we're not really supportive of Israel in the Hasidic community. We're loyal Americans. We don't have the dual loyalties that others, including the Orthodox community, might be accused of. But we it is what it is. You know, we have our communities. We have like this, and that's what it is. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories and lies about the Hasidic community and the other Orthodox communities. But the fact of the matter is, President Trump's daughter and son-in-law attend the Hasidic synagogue in Washington, D.C., even though they themselves are modern Orthodox and not Hasidic, but they are comfortable in the Hasidic synagogue. In fact, they're more comfortable in the Hasidic synagogue than in the more liberal synagogue, which is more of their culture. Although Jared Kushner has been connected with that particular Hasidic community for a long time. The thing that a lot of people bring up is, look, that in local elections and state elections and so forth, the Orthodox communities, the Hasidic communities, tend to vote Democrat. So, what's going on there? It pains me that that's true. There's two reasons for that. One is that they're very visible communities, and if the Democrats are going to win with or without them, Cuomo was going to win with or without the Hasidim. That other 50,000 votes wasn't going to make a difference as far as I voted for Molinaro, but I live in a small rural area. I don't live in Kiryas Joel or New Square or something. So out of fear of retribution, the Hasidic communities will often vote for whoever's going to win anyway. And it's the same thing that Donald Trump did for a long time. I've said, in a way, Donald Trump is like a one-man Hasidic community in his approach to politics. That he did support Democrats most of his life, just because that's the way to get things done in New York. Even though it probably wasn't he wasn't happy with that. And the same thing, the Hasidic community are very uncomfortable with a lot of the social issues with the Democrat Party, although sometimes they say it's none of our business. Live and let live type of thing. There's different views in that in the community, how to approach that. But again, it's the same question. So then, all these issues, though, brought up in this video, the big question is, where do you want the Hasidic Jews to go? A lot of Hasidic Jews don't want to live in the high-density parts of Monsey, Kaser. They want to live in a more suburban, or even in Sullivan County in a rural setting. But they also want to be able to be in walking distance to synagogue, which is why you might have a small synagogue in a home or something like that, and the mikveh and so forth, so they can perform these things on the Sabbath, because they don't drive on the Sabbath. It's part of, and so again, these issues about high density housing do have a religious connotation to them. Other than that, so I mean, the question is, how do you want them to build? Do you want them to build up? Or you want them to build out? You know, it's going to be one or the other, and most likely it's going to be both. So, meaning, what option do you have? The thing that a lot of people were upset about, I mean, this thing with the water, a lot of people will say that's a dog whistle because it goes back to old days when they would say the Jews are poisoning the well in medieval times. But the other issue, it was about the secession of the town of Palm Tree from the town of Monroe. What that did was it weakened the power and influence, and limited and weakened the power and influence of the Hasidic community, and contained it, which I think would be something you would want. The same thing how in Kiryas Joel they have a separate school district, so you don't have the issues that you have in East Ramapo, where there's all these optics. Even though the issues, I think a lot of them are exaggerated, but you don't have even the optics of an issue. It's not even unseemly in any way. So these are, but it's harder to do that, to accomplish something like that in Rockland County, because it's a more spread out community, and somewhat integrated. So it would be very hard. How would you make the lines to split the school district? Though a possibility would be to make a very small public school that's a totally secular public school, even though the Kiryas Joel public school is secular, but all the services and classes are in the Yiddish language. This would not be geared for the Jewish community, but it would be a school district that's much smaller, and you separate the two. You separate by some kind of neighborhood lines, but then again, people are going to be uncomfortable with that. There's going to be complaints on both ends, but I think that's going to be the answer, really, to that. So, but so many things that were brought up in this video sound to me like Democrat talking points. They don't sound like something I would expect from a Republican. And that's what I'm most surprised about. And that's why I said these are Rockefeller Rhino Republicans. They're not the classical liberal, Glenn Beck, Ted Cruz type Republicans. And it upsets me to see, because I'm very proud to be a Republican. I'm very proud to be part of the party of Lincoln. I'm very proud that I voted for Donald Trump. I'm very proud that I voted for Mark Molinaro. Even though he lost, I'm very proud that I voted for what's his name? Well, he lost. My congressman was from last time. Even though he lost, what's his name? I met him, John Faso. I miss him. He was a great man, and I don't understand why he lost, but that's how it is. So that and the other thing that I wanted to bring up in the post there is housing values, home values. It's well documented. You can ask any real estate agent, if there's an Orthodox synagogue within walking distance of a home, the home value rises. And so I've often said it's not blockbusting, but it's gentrification when the Orthodox communities come in, which actually we see in Monticello now, where it was horrible crack houses, and about 20 families of Hasidim moved in, and they cleaned up the neighborhood. I mean, I live in Sullivan County, but I work in Rockland County. I'm the Jewish chaplain in the Rockland Psychiatric Center. I've been harassed going to ShopRite in Pearl River, um, not too far from there. And one thing that upset me was the Commissioner of Human Rights came to speak on Martin Luther King Day, or a little after Martin Luther King Day, a few years ago, at Rockland Psychiatric Center, and she was saying, first of all, hateful things against President Trump, but also hateful things against the Hasidic community. And I had just spoke and talked about what good relations that Dr. Martin Luther King had with the Jewish community, and he even had one of his honorary doctorates was from a Jewish seminary, and that's how it is. So I actually got up and left because I very rarely get offended. People can, say all kinds of offensive things, and I don't get offended very easily, And but this offended me, and it also offended me that she insulted President Trump. I mean, Martin Luther King was a Republican, so that's my 2 cents. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later.